Hey guys, what's up? Chris here, back with another tea talk. So I haven't done one of these videos in about a month, so I thought I would do one tonight for you. So tonight we're drinking Asano Yume, which is a Tamaryokucha from Nagasaki Prefecture that I picked up at Kettle out in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. So Asano Yume means morning dream, and a Tamaryokucha is very similar to a sencha in processing, but there's one last step. The producers roll the tea leaves into a ball at the end, so that produces curled tea leaves as opposed to the very straight jokoro or sencha tea leaves. Like I said, the tea comes from Nagasaki Prefecture, which is in Kyushu, which is the southernmost island of the four main islands of Japan. So Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu. And Nagasaki is on the western side of Kyushu. And as we all know, unfortunately, Nagasaki was the site of the second atomic bomb in August of 1945. But something you might not know, although it has come to light within the last decade or so, is Nagasaki is the heartland of Christianity in Japan. Martin Scorsese made a movie called Silence, which came out in about 2016, but it's based off of Endo Shusaku's novel of the same name. And in that movie, two Jesuit priests go to Japan in search of their teacher, who was on a mission to Japan previously, but they hadn't heard from him in a long time. So they went to Japan to find him. Unfortunately, this is during a time where Christianity is banned in Japan, and let's just say they don't have a good time while they're there. But go read the book, go watch the movie. It's very good. So let's talk about Christianity in Japan. So Christianity was brought to Japan by St. Francis Xavier, who was a Jesuit priest from Spain. He was from the Navarre region of Spain, and he went to the University of Paris for college, and his roommates were Peter Favre, or Peter Favre, I don't really know how to say his last name, and St. Ignatius of Loyola, the future founder of the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits. So they're at the University of Paris together, and Ignatius starts to have these ideas about being a priest and spreading the gospel, and eventually his roommates join him in his endeavor in forming the Jesuits, or the Society of Jesus. And Xavier is called to spread the gospel to the east. So he goes to India at first. He brings Christianity to India, in the Goa region of India in particular, which is, I think, in southern India. And then eventually he meets a Japanese guy and goes to Kagoshima and brings Christianity to Japan. So you should be familiar with Kagoshima from my previous videos, but Kagoshima is also in Kyushu, and at first Christianity is tolerated. Xavier is allowed to spread his gospel, and eventually a couple daimyo or warlords become Christian. This is during the late 1500s, so Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi are in power during the time that Christianity is spreading in Japan, and again it's tolerated, although not encouraged totally, but it's left alone. But by the time the shogunate, the Tokugawa shogunate, is formed or takes power in the early 1600s, Christianity is sort of seen as this this foreign religion, and a threat to the Tokugawa shogunate's power. So there was like a brief rebellion by the Christian warlords that was crushed by the shogunate. So eventually the shogunate decides that they're going to close Japan. So they close the country to trade, and they outlaw Christianity. So they kick all the priests out, and they outlaw the practice of Christianity for Japanese people. But the foreigners are allowed to stay in this man-made island called Dejima in Nagasaki. And there, a very, very small amount of foreigners there. But there's some Dutch people, and there's some Portuguese traders. And the Portuguese were very important in Japanese history throughout the 1500s. They've actually lent some words from Portuguese into Japanese. So the word pan, or bread, in Japanese is pan in Portuguese and Spanish, I think. And they all mean bread. And they also introduced the concept of deep frying food, which the Japanese had not done previously. So that became tempura, and eventually katsu later. But they were in Dejima, and they didn't venture out too often. They weren't allowed to. But the Japanese people that became Christian during the time that Christianity was allowed, a lot of them kept practicing their religion even though it was banned, and they became called the隠れキリシタン, or the hidden Christians. And so they sort of developed their own culture under the ban. So they still said their prayers in Latin, and they learned Portuguese, or the Portuguese that they learned from the priests was passed down, and they formed their own little different prayers. So the prayers were in Latin. They were in a mix of Latin, Portuguese, and Japanese, which is pretty cool. They still use Portuguese words for religious terms. So heaven was paraíso, God was Deus. So it's pretty cool. Unfortunately, they were persecuted during the Tokugawa shogunate, and that's what that movie Silence sort of explores in detail. But some of the persecution, so every year the shogunate and the government would make the townspeople stomp on pictures of the Holy Family, of Jesus, of the Virgin Mary, and these pictures were called fumie in Japanese. So to prove you were not a Christian, you would either have to stomp or spit on these fumie. And of course, the people that were religious, had a very hard time doing this. So if you did it, you were seen as an apostate from Christianity, and so you were kind of shunned by your family, and then you were also killed by the government before being Christian. So it was kind of a lose-lose situation. But if you were found to be Christian, you were tortured and you were killed by the government. And some of the torture methods were they would make a little slit in your forehead and hang you upside down, and you would slowly bleed to death. The drops of blood would just drop onto the ground, and eventually you would bleed out. Another method was, Nagasaki is known for hot springs, particularly ones that are not safe to bathe in. They're just simply too hot. But the government would sort of march these Christians and these priests up the mountain and drop them into the boiling hot springs, and they would boil alive. But to sort of move on from that, so these Kakure Christians were spread around Nagasaki, and but they would flee to the Goto Islands, which are a set of islands off the coast of Nagasaki, and that's where Kakure Christianity, or Kakure Christian, or hidden Christianity, sort of developed. They sort of adopted Buddhist imagery to hide, the Christian practices. So they use the statue of Kannon, which is a deity within Buddhism, and they called it Maria Kannon. So they used it as an image of the Virgin Mary, and they did all sorts of different practices. They would go into the woods, and you would just think there'd be a couple, like a pile of rocks, but that was actually like a church or a chapel. So you would move the rocks into the shape of a cross, and you would say your prayers there. It's fascinating, actually. I love this stuff. That's why, Endo Shusaku's works are so important to me. I love his writing. So he has three books about hidden Christians. One is Silence, Kiku's Prayer, and also a book called Sachiko. And they all explore the world of hidden Christianity within Japan. Endo was a Catholic, and he is a prolific writer in Japanese literary history. But sort of a topic that Kiku's Prayer explores is the discovery of these hidden Christians by a French priest in Nagasaki in 1873. So Father Petitjean was the pastor of a cathedral in Nagasaki, which only foreigners were allowed to worship in. They would come off Dejima to go to mass, and after the Meiji Restoration, there were a lot more foreigners within Japan. So normal foreigners would just go to mass there, but after the Meiji Restoration, the ban on Christianity was lifted. So all these, hidden Christians started to come to the church, and Petitjean was amazed by their rituals and their practices, and how they hadn't lost the faith. So after the ban, many rejoined the mainstream Catholic Church, but many actually didn't. A small percentage didn't, but they carried on their hidden Christian practices, although they became sort of heretical by heretical practices as taught by the Catholic Church. But in the 1990s, it was discovered that these people from the 1870s had carried on their traditions, and there was a movie or a book written about in the 1990s about the continued practice of hidden Christianity in Japan, and there's a couple YouTube videos about it as well. So if you want to explore it, it's fascinating. But actually, I used to work at a Japanese travel agency here in New York, and the Goto Islands became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in maybe like 2017 or 2018, and I tried to build a whole tour around it, exploring Nagasaki, exploring the Goto Islands, and the whole sort of culture of hidden Christianity in Nagasaki. Unfortunately, it didn't come to fruition, but maybe one day I'll lead my own tour and teach people about it. But so to me, this is fascinating. Like, St. Francis Xavier is the namesake of my high school in New York City. And when I found out that he brought Christianity to Japan, you know, my interest in Japan goes back to when I was about 4 or 5 years old. So when I was in high school, like, I was deep into like learning all that I can about Japan, and it sort of, it planted a seed. Like, I really want to visit like these sites in Kyushu, in Kagoshima and Nagasaki, you know, and I unfortunately haven't been able to. I tried to go to Kagoshima when I was a teacher in Japan, but unfortunately that trip, everything went wrong during that trip, and I did not end up in Kagoshima that time. But it is a place that I really, really want to visit, and is on the list of places to go when I either, you know, move back to Japan or visit Japan next time. But yeah, and definitely check out Endo's books. But let's have a little taste of this tea. So it's sort of light green or yellow in liqueur, in the color of the liquid, and it's supposedly less astringent than sencha. So let's have a taste. So it's definitely less astringent, and it leaves sort of like a buttery coating on in your mouth, which I really enjoy. Yeah, I'm gonna drink the rest of this, and I hope you liked my little history lesson on the history of hidden Christianity in Nagasaki. All right, take care.